All right. Well, the boys are back in town. Got everyone back in the studio for BDE this week. Chuck and I got to go to Exxon's campus last week and get the tour. No one would tell me where Darren Wood's office was, unfortunately.
We walked right under it.
Woodlands,
we walked right under it, and they pointed to it.
Didn't they
maybe
relocate?
they didn't tell
I think
you
they
where it
relocated
was.
them, so they're.
That's not his real office, dude.
Well, that's what no one actually knows officially. They don't know officially where his real office is. They think it's at corner.
I can get an
office.
answer right. I can text the guy and get an answer right now.
Let's see it.
All right.
Prove it.
I could too, but
Tell him I want to know exactly where his office is, and Darren needs to come on the podcast. But no, it's really cool. We got to they walked
Currently
us
broadcasting live at BDE, and we're asking where Darren Wood's office
Kirk's using his voice to
is.
text. You know what I've realized about voice to text? There's this very bimodal distribution of ages that use voice to text. You're either 7 years old or you're 40 plus.
Damn, dude. Wow. You don't use it?
No, like no one in between 20
I'm
and 40
scared of
uses
having
So what do
it
you do?
on. I've
You
looked-
type fast?
Yeah.
You thumb fast?
Well, what's funny is like my little kids use it.
uses
So-
his voice.
It's only, not calling you guys old, but it's only weighted towards older people and like really young kids.
I don't use it. That scares me because I look down talking about, texting somebody going, man, that dude's an asshole. And you look down and
And
you're
it's
just like,
types it out.
wow.
Yeah. So
I
anyway,
Hey, a quick answer. Top of one of the energy buildings. So, exactly.
That narrows it down.
yeah.
top of one of the
I had
energy
heard that they
buildings.
were moving from a very secluded, very exclusive part of the campus to something more.
6th floor, bro. Nailed it. 6th floor.
Well, we walked under and they were pointing.
Yeah.
Hey, there's-
That's about six. I mean, that building's only 6 stories or so.
So I actually sent this to a buddy of mine who's pretty senior dude over there. I said, in all seriousness, for all the perception of old stodgy Exxon, really cool vibe out there. Love the energy of the young folks. The technology we got to see was unbelievable. So count me as a fan. I'm an Exxon fan.
Yeah, no.
All right. Here, this is a good Exxon exec for you. LOL, which I guess only people over 40 probably use. They moved it because it was in sniper view. I can't say the specific building.
Okay, yeah.
See, a good employee is going to not give out the details. If I ask some other people, they'd be like, "Oh, it's exactly here."
Yeah, the
He's
rumor is,
protecting.
the rumor
protecting
is
the
they
game.
said
Good for them.
they pointed to where they thought his office was, and the rumor is that it has all bulletproof glass, and he's got an underground tunnel parking with an elevator that takes him up to the office.
He's Batman.
Yeah, that's like,
Batman.
being CEO of Exxon is much different than being CEO of Digital Wildcatters. Don't get the bat cave. They said he's got a gym, cafeteria in his office.
Yeah, you don't even get front row parking because everyone takes it before you get here.
I know, dude.
Shit, man.
What the fuck am I doing with my life? But no, it was really cool. We got to walk through their remote operating center. I was telling Mark this earlier before we got on the podcast, but the guy that runs the room, longtime company man on these deep water drill ships, and I think they're running 6 deep water drill ships around the world. And he's got this room, and it's a big command station in one corner, and you got NOV over there. You got another command station, it's Halliburton, the other one's Baker, and he's essentially assembled all of his oilfield service vendors just like you would on a deep water rig. And anyways, with the click of a button, I mean, they're steering the drill bit. I mean, not clicking a button and sending an email and saying, hey, turn the bit. I mean, they're actually controlling the operations all around the world from this room. So it was very cool to see that. I said, hey, let me come do a podcast here. They said they won't let them. So all I can do is
Are
give
they
you the best.
controlling you right now?
They are. Well,
But
Exxon's
for all
playing
our
now.
bitching about the energy business and not collaborating, it was cool seeing all the different service companies in one spot, sharing information, best practices. I felt a lot better about the industry, actually.
Chuck, you don't bitch
20
about
minutes.
the energy industry. And the energy industry built you, bro.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, there's always
But-
this
You're a
weird-
defender of it.
There's this weird dichotomy though, because we talk like you see this. We always talk about like the industry not collaborating and sharing information, but then you get on deepwater.
Get
rigs
on an
like
actual
this.
rig.
Yeah, it happens.
There's all kinds
Yeah.
of collaboration.
Yeah, it happens on rigs. It happens out in the field, and so it's just this
Especially the
weird.
deep water. It's
The-
amazing.
This
how
is just a
much
lot more
collaboration is
comfortable environment.
Yeah.
Nice chairs, nice screens, dark room. Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice break area.
You're not
Like,
sitting in
you light some
Oklahoma
candles.
City,
So, yeah, I mean,
guess.
Light some candles, pour up a bottle of wine, and you can collaborate.
Speaking of collaboration, and your favorite company, ExxonMobil, they just bought 120,000 acres in Arkansas, and they're doing lithium mining.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
So
we talked about that acquisition, but had they started
it's
production
public
yet?
today. I don't know if they started production, but
because we talked about it on BDE a couple months ago.
That's right.
But I love it because, it's funny. I gave what was I talking to? It was in New Mexico. Oh, at the Carlsbad Mayor Energy Convention or something like that. And it's like 2,000 people. And anyways, I was up there talking, and they didn't really give me much direction on what to talk about. So I talked about everything. Talked about lithium.
So they've had Chuck speak before.
Yeah. Talked about lithium extraction from brine, and I had 3 people come up to me and super interested about that. They're like, hey, where can we go to learn more about that? And now you see Exxon starting to make these moves, and essentially what they're doing is, when I first started thinking about the idea, it was a few years ago. I saw this company called Lilac Solutions, and they invented this technology to strip lithium out of brine water, and they were partnering up with geothermal plants out in Nevada and California. And I was thinking about it. It's like oil and gas produces a shit ton of brine water. It's like, is there lithium in that brine? And
probably.
I'm not a geologist, but it seems like there's higher concentrations of lithium in plays like the Smackover and that area compared to places like West Texas. But think Exxon, you go take up these big leaseholds and then deploy some of this new technology to strip that lithium.
Yeah, we talked about the lithium concentrations, as I recall. I don't remember the actual benchmarks for sweet spot in terms of lithium concentration, but it was pretty high in the spectrum of things that have been considered for.
Who do we know that's got some info on that? On
a mining company? I could get some people.
Well,
for my short time that I worked for one of the largest mining companies,
the 6 weeks you put in,
6 weeks, I learned a lot. At first, I was like, you show up and you're like, hey, where's the lithium? And it's like gold, and you strike gold, and you're like, it's everywhere. What I realized is, hey, see that entire mountain? We get about 1 battery out of that. We're going to remove this entire mountain, and there's a bunch of other shit in there, but we get some lithium.
But see, that actually brings up a really important point because, there's these charts people post on Twitter all the time, and it shows the amount of materials that we have to mine, and oil and gas is always sky high on the chart, and the amount of lithium and metals is small. But what it doesn't account for is all that oil and gas comes from a small wellhead, right?
Well, hole this big.
Lithium and metals, you have to move all of this dirt to get a little amount. And so they never take into consideration
Mark Mills does a nice job on the volume moved.
Yeah, that's what I'm
It's 500,000 pounds of stuff.
Right.
To ultimately get to 1,000-pound Tesla battery.
Yeah, and it's not the Boy Scouts out doing it.
1,000.
Yeah, 500,000 to 1,000. So that includes overburden. You got to dig up a lot of stuff to get.
That's
to the
actually
stuff.
pretty damn good because we were discussing direct air capture, and what's the magnitude there, Mark?
2,500 to 1.
2,500 to 1.
I mean, if you think about air, it's 0.04%, which is 0.0004 CO2. Right. So you're moving 2,500 units of air to capture 1 unit of CO2.
But we have a trivia question sponsored by, who's our sponsor this week?
Chili's.
Sponsored by Chili's.
Presidentes.
And Brinkers. But Chuck, what's the trivia question? You had a trivia question for the audience, and maybe we'd hear an answer. What's the trivia?
Actually, this is a game. This is what we're going to do.
This is a good
I
game.
want all the experts to come out today and tell us exactly what is the right amount of CO2 to have in the atmosphere and what it will lead to if we have that. And we'll just see who's right in 50 years.
Because if you have too much, right, Chuck, you grow a lot of shit, right?
Well, were you listening?
And if you have too little, everything freezes.
I try not to, but
because we were talking about this. Yeah, it was.
And I'm not even.
I think it was at Exxon. I was like, if you today we had the technology, we'd harness the technology to control the concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere. What is the perfect amount of CO2? Because you got to think, I'm sure Putin would love for Russia to be thawed out.
Warm water port.
Yeah.
Damn.
David Ramsden Wood would love Canada to be 5 degrees warmer.
Yeah. But you think about all
There's a reason we haven't invaded Canada yet.
Think about all the resources that Russia would be able to unlock.
But your whole point is who makes the call if we have the technology, right? I'm like, we don't even know the technology.
Yeah.
So go ahead and make your guess on how much CO2 should be there and what it'll lead. And we'll come back and put it in the time capsule, come back.
Love it.
50 years. Winner gets the El Presidente margarita from Chili's.
But it's not even in the time capsule. It's in Collide Pro. Bro.
There we go.
All we have is at our fingertips.
Which is in some respects a time capsule.
No, what is Collide Pro? Collide Pro, let me just tell you about Collide Pro. It used to be called something else, but this is actually amazing. All I have to do is get on Collide Pro and type in, like, you know, what's the appropriate amount of CO2 in the atmosphere, and it'll pull up today's episode.
Pull up today's episode.
And not only will it give me today's episode, it'll give me the exact where in the episode, and it'll actually have the transcript there and highlighted of any
this
time
is kind
we
of
say
bad
CO2.
for us moving forward. Like any predictions that we give, we gotta think that these things can be indexed and looked up.
Dude, I had a
quickly.
Chevron engineer bust my balls a week and a half ago on this exact topic. He's like, don't you guys remember when you guys gave predictions on oil prices? I was like, yeah, we didn't pull that shit up. But with Collide Pro, we could do that, and we should do that.
We should
We can scorecard ourselves.
Yeah, we got to look. I mean, we should make it like every quarter. We should make a prediction. And
Remember when we were doing each European country? Let's once a quarter we'll do our predictions, and then that way they're on the record.
Yeah, and then we can have a bet on the line.
So I know
El
we've
Presidente margarita to the
I know we've been all disjointed here, jumping around. The one thing I do want to circle back with, because Mark, you and I have talked about this, because I think this is interesting, and this will be a prediction that we can go back and look at.
Okay.
I think actually mining is a core competency to oil and gas companies. And so if you think strategic fits going forward, as much as the ESG crowd would hate that, investors may not react favorably. I mean, if you are a really good oil and gas company, being able to then go extract lithium, then to be able to go and potential mine, same kind of core skill set.
I mean, who else
could
is
be really interesting?
Who else is going to do it? Microsoft, Google. I mean, it's
Apple.
It's the energy mining companies that have the technical ability.
Well, and gas is extractive. Each wellbore is a mini mine, right?
Yeah,
and so
exactly.
Who better equipped to understand extraction in really bad places?
Yeah,
right?
political
from a harsh environment,
of,
political nuance, tremendous amount of issues in places like Congo, Democratic Republic of Congo, as has been pointed out recently with cobalt red, et cetera. Just the magnitude of the increase in critical minerals extraction, and now the hyper attention on doing it more responsibly, I think, is going to necessarily involve those companies who have been doing it, who've been extracting things for 150 years.
We have the
DRC,
the most responsible extractors on the planet.
I mean, the DRC, and then also Arkansas, as ExxonMobil's finding out. In fact, Dan Amon, the head of Exxon's low carbon solutions business, quotes, "We're drilling wells 10,000 feet underground into these saltwater reservoirs. That's obviously directly in our wheelhouse and capability set." Yeah, he's talking about the lithium mining. I mean, that's exactly what they do.
Well, what's cool about it is I love it because, to Chuck's point, people that are EV advocates in the name of fighting climate change and big bad oil, now you got to get your lithium from big bad oil. And so I love the irony and justice
and
there.
You got to do it here too. I mean, if we're going to be intellectually honest about this, we need to do it in the United States. You can't just export the problems. And that's what
well, it's not even exporting. It's not even exporting the problems. It's a matter of national security and energy security. I mean, do you want all your lithium coming from supply chains that are owned by China, and being able to secure our own resource and our own source of lithium is pretty critical.
Yeah.
We don't have a lot, like right now, as far as we know, we don't have a lot of metal resources in the United States. So, we're rich in coal and oil and gas, and but we don't have huge metal deposits. So
we have the Salton Sea in California. Right?
Yeah.
There's big copper mines up in the Yukon.
Yeah. That's where, that's why, lilac
what's the big deposits in Vermont, I think?
There's lithium.
There's some up like in the Northeast.
There was a Maine story about a couple that have a pretty significant lithium deposit, but there's a lot of immediate and quite strident opposition.
Right.
That getting a mine
somebody in North
established in Maine, I think, would be well beyond the span of my remaining lifetime.
Right. And there was a project that a publicly traded company, and I'm blanking on the name, tried to get permitted for the last 15 years in North Carolina, and instead they gave up and are pursuing a mine in the Congo.
Yeah,
because they thought it would be politically easier.
Yeah, the the Exxon thing's interesting to me because I haven't seen anything on this. I don't know if y'all have, but I don't know if they're partnering with Lilac Solutions to deploy their technology, or if they've developed their own internal technology to strip that lithium out. But Lilac's backed by Chris Sacca's fund, Lower Carbon Ventures, and actually, who invested in it was Coley from Crusoe. He was one of their angel investors. Because when I brought up lithium mining like 3 years ago, Coley's eyes lit up. He's like, no one else is talking about that. He's like, me and my dad are buying up, these assets, and they invested in Lilac. And so I'm interested if Exxon is going to deploy that third-party technology, or if they've developed some process on their own.
I saw a lot of those business plans kind of over the last 18 months, 2 years of people having a technology. So I'm not sure it's that proprietary, but who knows?
Yeah.
What you won't see is Exxon jumping out of ahead of commercial viability at scale and committing capital because of the returns risk to any of that.
Well, yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's material, their position, right? So they have they have their hands around something that they think that
it's a great adjacency to what their core business is.
Yeah.
Right?
But what's interesting is like no one was talking about this just a couple of years ago. And so, what other types of resources are out there that we can find? I mean, no one was looking at Arkansas out of all places as being some big lithium deposit. So are there other places that we can find high lithium concentration as well and extract it? So
other places that aren't in California.
Exactly.
Yeah. Here's what I love about like the future of energy is still subsurface. So whether it's lithium, hydrogen, CCUS, geothermal, and it's like oil and gas. We've extracted all this oil and gas, and we've, essentially put CO2 in the atmosphere. Now we'll capture that CO2 and we'll charge to inject it. And then we'll drill geothermal wells. Like it's a circular economy that oil and gas companies just never die. We just figure out new ways to recycle and reuse. So I find that, and I think like, I was talking about that at Exxon. It's like Exxon's really well poised to take advantage of all of these things. So anyways, the lithium is super exciting. I mean, I think that's obviously it's dependent on geology, but I think that trend's going to continue.
Plus it just cleans up a waste stream. I mean, you're injecting, I mean, it's still nasty salt brine water, but at the end of the day, you're taking some bad stuff out of it. So
Yeah.
This next story actually kind of bummed me out. Who's up? Mark, are you up on NuScale? And
yeah, there was a pretty important announcement last week by NuScale, and the Utah Associated Municipal Power System decided not to proceed with the small modular reactor project that was actually going to be located in Idaho, I think adjacent to a research facility, but it was going to serve, I don't know how many are in that system, but NuScale's stock was off 42% last week. Pretty big setback for, I think, SMR progress, at least from a headline standpoint, and citing some of the old familiar factors that we've seen in offshore wind with things like inflation, supply chain, cost overruns, et cetera. And so I think these utility commissions are looking at this environment and seeing what kind of rate increases are going to be needed to support investment and operation, and saying, look, we just can't politically go to the rate base or the rate payers with continued escalation in rates and pricing. So
it'd be great to see on a normalized basis, like what's the cost per megawatt hour of these projects, like the small modular reactor, nuclear, the offshore wind. We don't really, like, no one really reports.
You've got
to
the
try to normalize.
You've got the Lazard, what do they call it? The LOCE, where they've supposedly
levelized cost of energy. Yeah.
And Thunberg did a piece a couple of weeks ago on just all the problems of, it talks about when it can deliver power over time, not necessarily where you need it. So you get into the reliability type issue, and the various other problems. It also doesn't account for, if we're going to build a whole lot of solar, it's going to happen in Texas and West Texas, and how are we going to get it to Houston,
right?
I.e. the transmission, the other costs and stuff. So supposedly the footnotes to that report are longer than the actual report itself for it. But yeah, this kind of bummed me out because
they don't do that for, we have hubs for gas. Oil is reported on on a per barrel, but that is also regional to some degree, right? We have Brent.
You can get a barrel of oil anywhere in the world for $1. For the most part, $2, whatever. Because we've got all the infrastructure to do it. This new power generation is going to be brand new lines that haven't even been permitted today, much less, built.
True. I did think one element, you mentioned the Thunberg piece, it's called fission chips, and it's really centered or anchored on the notion that, the explosion in data center demand and chip manufacturing. Somebody tweeted out a big construction site in Sherman, Texas, and it's quietly becoming a chip manufacturing hub.
Mm-hmm.
But basically saying that because of the extreme reliability that's required and the scale and the cost, that tech will get this done politically, despite opposition from environmental activists, and they cited a few of the well-known activist groups, because it's their absolute future. And so there's so much political clout on the side of tech that basically I think what they were just suggesting, that it's just going to get steamrolled.
Step back, set up the story for me about vision. And
what the story was basically centered on the fact that nuclear is going to have to be a key part of satisfying demand, and there's just so much ambient momentum behind chip manufacturing and data centers that it's actually just going to steamroll things over the long run.
Well, what's interesting is Texas is actually being seen as a harbinger of the future, because usually electricity does increase. People need more and more electricity, but it's offset by efficiency gains. Like we come with more efficient things, like our iPhones use less power.
Let me throw the stat at you real quick. It's 1950 to 2000. Power usage in America up almost 15x, because we came up with all this cool stuff to do with power, lighting, computers, washers and dryers, refrigerators, air conditioning. 2000 to basically today, it's been flat. To your point, lighting has gotten so incredibly efficient. ACs have gotten so incredibly efficient. Even computers, we're using 10x the power in data centers over the last decade, but only using about 10% more power to power those because the machines have gotten way more efficient, and all that shit ends today. I mean, basically the machines are as efficient as they're going to get.
Well,
so
that's actually not true. Like, I was going to have a talking point is you're going to see, it's just like Bitcoin mining. Bitcoin mining went from operating on CPUs to GPUs to ASICs. You're going to see the same thing happen with machine learning. Is like, I've already seen a couple of tech companies that are working on new ASICs that perform specific operations within generative AI. And so they become more efficient. And so I think you're going to see some pretty big efficiency gains in the actual machines through the use of ASICs, moving from GPUs to ASICs over time. But I still think that just the volume.
Well, everything in life's an S curve to some degree. And
yeah.
Definitely 2000 to today was a steep part of the S curve. And whether we got more steepness, I'm thinking we're flattening out. You think we got more steepness. The shit's hitting the fan. That's the point. Yeah. There's no more hiding behind these big, huge efficiency gains. We need more power.
Well,
that's why we're having brownouts.
I mean, interesting in the U.S. over the last decade, sales or energy consumption grew 5%. Texas grew 25%.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is, and they're like, well, is this a harbinger? Why Texas? With a few reasons. One, you have things that we know about Tesla Gigafactory turned on, the largest all-electric LNG facilities on the Texas Gulf Coast, Bitcoin mining. But as we're reshoring manufacturing, as data center, as we've talked about data centers, we don't have enough. They're already tapping out, but we're trying to electrify everything. And so Texas is actually struggling because our energy consumption is going through the roof.
I don't know if you're just a little kind of how big is this stuff in terms of increments to demand. I think one of the statistics that was cited in the Fish and Chips article was that the data centers currently under development
Correct.
would consume all of the output of Diablo Canyon, which supplies 20% of California's electricity. That's just what's under development now.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if y'all were on this.
What did Adam say to Eve the first time they were together? You better back up. We don't know how big this thing's going to get.
When we, I don't know if y'all were on this episode. It might have just been me and Chuck, but we read off.
Sponsored by Adam and Eve Boutique. We have to get used to saying these things. People are fighting us to sponsor the show, man. I'm just trying to get your head around it. Go ahead, Colin.
Anyways, we talked on this one episode, just kind of ran through a short list of some of the battery plants that were being built in the United States, the chip plants, going back to the lithium conversation, talking about security of supply chains and diversification in supply chains. It's the same thing with chips. We don't want to be dependent on China and Taiwan to produce our chips. And so the CHIPS Act was passed to incentivize these companies to build these chip plants here. And guess what? They're going to co-locate with reliable energy assets. I keep seeing like Elon promoting this narrative on Twitter and other people that 100 miles by 100 miles of solar panels will power the entire United States. And everyone's like, oh my gosh, why don't we just build 100 square miles of solar panels? But he always leaves out the battery capacity needed to make sure that it's reliable, the transmission. I mean, Elon's smarter than this. He knows these things. And he did make a secondary comment to that. He's like, we would need battery capacity, of course. Well, like, yeah, that's a big.
But that's a big headline's the headline.
He's also talking his book. So
yeah,
the headline's the headline though.
Yeah. So, anyways, I think what's been interesting, call it the last 10 years, is whether people know this or not, big tech has been a huge driver of the energy makeup in the United States. Google, Amazon, Microsoft. Because what they're doing is they go get these big power purchase agreements for their data centers, and they tell the utilities, hey, this has to be 100% clean, renewable power. So now the utility has to go,
Right.
has to go source that power. And so these big tech companies are driving energy infrastructure, whether it's intentional or not. They're saying, I need 5 gigawatts of power. It better be clean. And it has second and third order effects.
And what's happening today that hasn't happened in the past, because you're absolutely right with what's been going on, is big tech's now being told no. Yeah. Like Dominion that services Virginia, because a lot of people want their data centers in and around Washington, D.C., is now telling people, we can't provide you the power.
Yeah.
And that's the big crisis thing that is happening right now that I don't know that Silicon Valley appreciates.
Yeah.
I mean, the upper echelons do,
you're
the
seeing
smarter
that with
ones.
Bitcoin mining in Texas. I mean, people are very adverse to Bitcoin mining and having these data centers. And, maybe there's some element of like, oh, you're mining fake internet money, but computer's a computer at the end of the day. Who cares if it's mining Bitcoin, if it's processing generative AI? And so if you see people in Texas bitching about that, complaining about it, you're going to see it in other parts of the country as well.
And that's why we're seeing Microsoft has come out and has put out press releases and alluding to embedding nuclear power into their data centers. And I think we're going to see more of this. So
I've said a big tech turns into energy companies.
I've told you, I don't know if I've told you two this, I've told Colin this. I've gone on Twitter into the direct messages to Mark Andreessen of Andreessen Horowitz and just acted like we're best friends. Hey man, this is a big problem. We got to throw a party and get this together, and we need to go to Telluride.
You can look at Chuck's text. He has a running like 30 texts in a row.
It's just
Mark not answering.
Yeah. It's like, you need to get your Silicon Valley VC guys together, and I'll get Texas private equity together, Energy PE, and we'll get together and solve this. Because in all seriousness, I would say we need to do that, Mark Andreessen. I'm in favor of Telluride, but they need to do that because we need their political clout that you alluded to earlier. But I don't think the existing utility infrastructure that generates the power is going to be able to solve this problem. I do think you're going to need private capital sources that can be more entrepreneurial. And that's not a huge group of folks these days. I mean, you've got some PE that does power generation, but I think it's going to be the Texas private equity guys that did the shale revolution that solved this power problem. I truly believe that, talking my own book, I guess. But
I think the thing that's interesting to me is the co-location of these data centers and chip manufacturers with energy assets, because now you can kind of mitigate the quote unquote transmission problem, because it's just like Bitcoin mining. Everyone's always used this term like Bitcoin has a battery, and it doesn't really make sense from a like physics perspective, but like from a theoretical perspective, I understand what they're saying. And it's, you can take, let's say it's flared gas, and you can convert that flared gas to electricity, and you can create a Bitcoin from it. And so you took something that was waste, created something of value, but now you can transfer that value anywhere around the world. Same thing will happen with these GPUs and data centers for generative AI. You have a geothermal asset that's out in the middle of nowhere, and you don't have any, like, you're not able to transmit that power anywhere if you build it. But if you build it and you co-locate it with one of these big data centers, now you can create something of value from that energy, and then you can transmit that value through.
Absolutely.
I mean, because the keyboard can be in Houston, Texas, in that room and at Exxon, right? Yeah. It doesn't have to be there. It can be.
I mean, one of the first deals I ever invested in energy was in 2010. They're building micro turbines for flare gas, specifically to generate energy.
Yeah.
To power the community or whatever. But people have been thinking about this for a long time. It's just really hard to execute, and especially when you're in remote places.
Yeah.
But circling back,
but
go ahead.
Let me add on to that. But that's changing, because one problem, and I mean, this is a very recent problem, we're talking like last 5 to 10 years, was bandwidth and latency issues of being able to transmit data. And that's not a problem anymore, especially with Starlink. coming out.
That's a good point.
Just fucking opens up the opportunity to be able to operate these data centers in really remote locations. And you know, that's I just think that we're seeing a few different things happen where it's enabling us to do these things.
If I could get the data, but to circle back on Dominion Energy, which is the primary utility for Virginia, since 2019, they've connected 75 new data centers.
Yeah.
This year alone, their energy consumption is up 7%, and they're forecasting that energy demand will grow by 85% over the next 15 years. I mean, this is a gigantic issue. And I know that's why John Arnold and Michael Skelly, who I admire in a big way, is Grid United, which they're trying to kind of build the grid that connects.
Yeah, they have a really interesting thesis that they're executing on. I enjoyed getting to hear what they were working on. You know, it's funny, just this is super random, but just talking about data centers being built up there in Ohio, Google has some pretty big data center operations. And it's actually funny. One of my good friends from down here, he's a petroleum engineer, drilling engineer, and I think he was drilling engineer for BHP, and moved up to Ohio to help manage their data centers. And so you see big tech taking oil and gas talent to go operate these large data centers, because at the end of the day, it's surface infrastructure.
Yeah.
So this is kind of crazy. I'm the oldest of four boys. The fifth Yates brother is Zane Ball, who we went to Rice with. Great dude. Went to Intel right after he got his PhD. Been there ever since. building chips. He now listens to the podcast because he's in charge of energy efficiency for
awesome,
Intel.
man.
And he's like, "Hey, I listened to you guys because I got to figure it out." They just worked on a. I think this is public. It's been announced that they worked with Shell on an immersion cooling technology, because obviously that's a big deal.
Yeah, I think we're actually talking to Shell about coming out to Empower to talk about what they're doing with that immersion cooling. But, you know, Intel, I think they since receded with this plan, but they were coming out with ASICs for Bitcoin mining. And I think they stopped that program just because the downturn in Bitcoin mining. But yeah, we need to get him on a show sometime and talk chip manufacturing.
Yeah. One last thing while we're on nuclear, then we can jump someplace else. But I'll give a shout out, because I've only listened to 2 episodes, but I can tell the rest of them are going to be good. MIT educated scientist Brett Kugelmass decided he wanted to learn about nuclear because he's really scared of climate change. He thinks the world's going to end. And he went around and started a podcast called Titans of Nuclear, where he just went around and talked to all the folks that had been working on nuclear, and he didn't think anyone would talk to him. And everybody's like, "You want to talk about nuclear? Sure, come on."
No doubt they've been starved for 20
years. No one wants to talk to us.
So anyway, I've started listening to it, and the first one I listened to made a really interesting point that I don't think I appreciate. The whole cost of nuclear is driven by the ability to replicate what you do. So if you go in and you build one, true economies of scale, the second one is half the price, third one's half the price of that. And so to some degree, if we're going to be doing nuclear in the United States, we may just have to pick something.
Pick a standard.
You know, that's it. And everybody, let's go.
An interesting thought experiment is, someone asked this the other day on Twitter, and I've been thinking about this a lot. It's like, should energy be a part of central planning? And if you look at nuclear, like, there's a really good case. Like, if we're going to subsidize any energy, we should be subsidizing nuclear, in my opinion. And if you look at like the productivity, and they're going to laugh at me for this, but I always think about to my video game days as a kid on the computer playing Command and Conquer Generals. The first thing that you had to do was you had to build power plants before you could build anything.
Right.
I mean, everything is downstream of energy, right? So our ability to be productive as a nation is dependent on our ability to have reliable and secure energy. And so do you guys think that there's ever a case where it makes sense to have, you know, subsidized nuclear that is part of central
well, when you mean central planning,
it sounds like Polar Bureau bullshit.
Come out of DOE or
Well, that's the thing. These
assuming it's at a Fed level.
DOE and DOD are funding stuff that we don't know about. So this is happening.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, so I think that in regards to central planning, less is more as far as I'm concerned. But I do think this is already happening. If you have a compelling technology, you're probably going to call the DOE and the DOD, because the DOD, the Department of Defense, needs remote power and storage, and they'll pay. I mean, there's anything that's interesting, remotely interesting, they're going to give you money to do something.
And the DoD has a great track record over a decade of running nuclear subs and aircraft
Speaking
carriers.
of that, someone on Twitter is like, "Hey, how come we can't just park some nuclear subs off of the coast
and just plug them in?"
Well, there's a good follow.
We don't like people knowing where they are. That's kind of the issue.
Just
there.
a side.
We like to keep those things hidden.
If you follow Bob Kuntz on Twitter, he's a former nuclear sub commander.
Mm-hmm.
He's got a methodology in an organization called the High Reliability Organization, and one of the things that resonated with me when I met Bob a few years ago was the extreme discipline and attention to detail and the tightness of managing a nuclear reactor underwater and on an aircraft carrier
While people are shooting at you.
right
Yeah.
Gives you
That
gives
seems pretty
you
hard.
a very secure and reliable
Yeah.
process and mechanism in people that are trained to do that very, very well, because the consequences of an accident, which we've not had any in the nuclear naval fleet, I think speaks pretty positively about what's possible with these small reactors.
Yeah.
We know how to do it.
And Colin, to your point, I mean, Richard Nixon, who created the Environmental Protection Agency, despite, being the conservative Republican and all, actually had 8,000 nukes across the United States plan. Now, none of them got built, but he actually laid that out, what you were talking about.
Yeah.
Sounds better.
Kind of went the
just
way
my opinion.
France
I wouldn't
did.
mind if nuclear energy was subsidized, because it's extremely reliable, energy dense, like baseload. But I don't like subsidizing renewables.
What's funny is back in my our Shell Ventures days, I get some deal, and it's like some entrepreneur calls me. He's like, "It's nuclear. It's a nuclear deal." And I was like, that's a good hedge for Shell, because oil and gas companies are like, every single one of you talk to any of their venture groups, like, we don't do nuclear. Like, it's just we can't do nuclear. You can't hedge because that might disrupt your entire oil and gas business. But I was like, well, that's why you make a bet in case it actually becomes something
in case
real.
it does something.
But I called it. It's a Silicon Valley team, which I'm already suspect.
Yeah.
And they're like, you got to sign NDA. It's top secret. I can't even tell you anything about what we're doing. I'm like, oh, well, let me guess. It's so amazing. You're going to be able to commercialize the technology in a day. Nuclear takes forever because it's so hard to do. There's so many constraints. The physics alone are actually astronomically difficult.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know what happened to that company. They might have raised a lot of money, but anyone that comes to me talking about a technology, I'm like, no one's going to steal your idea.
Well, it's not even like
you have to put this into play and show that I can reliably and safely produce energy.
And I hear a funny story. When I raised the seed round for digital wildcatters, I got invited to this angel group in Houston. And I mean, this group cuts like maybe 25K checks collectively. And anyways, they had 3 startups. I was the second one to pitch. And so I'm sitting there listening to the first one. And it was this guy pitching a nuclear fusion startup, and he's looking to raise a $300,000 seed. And I'm like texting the guy at the angel group. I'm like, dog, you need fucking 300 million minimum get started with nuclear fusion, not 300K. The fuck are you doing here, wasting my time?
So make fun of the Secretary of Energy. I love this. Which one of y'all wants to?
There was a ribbon cutting at the Heirloom Project in California, which is 1,000 ton a year direct air capture, and immediately I guess the rules of thumb around kind of what all that means and trying to think about scale and impact was the junket, the air travel in her entourage to go make that ceremony in California would require 4 months of almost 4 months of the capture of this facility. Now, this is admittedly a small scale facility, but as we were talking earlier, we were looking at 2,500 units of air to capture 1 unit of CO2. Right, gives you an idea of what reality is, I guess. And Mike Umbro tweeted out some statistics on renewables and direct air capture. I think that you had commented on as well, Kirk. And you're the roundtable expert here.
I mean, I'd love for a direct air capture apologist to come on our show, because it's not even, you don't even get to the micro. The macroeconomic view of direct air capture is ridiculous. It takes so much energy to capture air and create. It doesn't make any scientific, physical sense to me. It doesn't. Economically, it doesn't make sense. So I'm not sure how this industry even became an industry, because it reminds me a lot of algae. You know how much algae you need? I mean, how much algae? You probably looked at this back in the days.
I got
when ExxonMobil did.
I actually had a venture capitalist come in when I was on the buy side, come in talking about this, and I looked at just the acreage and kind of the yield of the technology they were promoting at that time, and it was, you start doing the numbers on making any kind of dent in even U.S. gasoline consumption, and it's just a ridiculous.
It's like first order principles here. We're going to take air and we're going to find CO2 in that air, which is very small.
So I think based upon the stats that I sent you for commercial air travel and emissions, that for this heirloom project, you would need 900,000 of those facilities worldwide.
It's crazy.
to offset what commercial air travel, which I believe is low single-digit percentages of total global CO2 emissions.
Yeah.
So, air travel, which makes up low single-digit of total CO2 emissions, and you need 900,000 of these facilities that are getting a ton of press.
You can check my work, but
it's getting a ton of press. I'm torn on it a little bit, and let me tell you why. Because technologies are built and refined over decades. It's funny that we're talking about nuclear subs. I had someone come on my show that built this electrolyzer that uses plasma to dissociate H2S molecules and create hydrogen. And guess where he learned all about electrolysis? Was from submarines, his time in the Navy on nuclear subs, and ran me through the historical context of where we're at today with the technology. And I mean, this started back like in the 50s, and like, was this guy had down the sequential order of steps that got us to where we're at today. And so I always struggle with this a bit, because you look at direct air capture and it doesn't make any fucking sense. But also, how are we supposed to have any technological breakthroughs in evolution and the technology if we're not deploying in actually trying to build it, right? So
you used an important word there, and that's evolution. I think all of a sudden in the last decade, we've somewhat shifted to this notion that everything has to occur at revolutionary pace. And for technology like this, for small modular nuclear, et cetera, it doesn't move naturally at that pace. And so why all of a sudden are we able to flip the switch and revolutionize very complex technologies, not to mention the difficult economic proposition?
I think it's more of looking at what's the problem here. Let's look at the problem, not the solution. We're talking about the solution, which is direct air capture. Do we have a problem with air? No, it's actually, when you kind of look at it, it blows your mind how our human bodies work. And there's air that somehow got created, whether you believe in Big Bang, I don't believe. There's probably higher order, whatever. 40% of CO2 emissions comes from heavy industry, cement manufacturing, steel manufacturing, chemical manufacturing. They produce a lot of waste. And we've solved acid rain. There's ways to take really bad shit that we create and do something with it. We have scrubbers, we have membrane technology. There's ways to take bad stuff. But what direct air capture, the premise is, hey, there's nothing wrong with the air, but let's take shit out of it. I'm like, you're making up a problem that doesn't exist, in my opinion.
Well,
there's other much bigger
I would add
challenges.
on to that is not attacking the lowest hanging fruit first. You know, the guy that I was just telling you about with this new electrolyzer, he's like, yeah, the way that we're actually looking at it is with the IRA, with the subsidy that comes with that. If we co-locate with renewable assets, produce hydrogen, and then that hydrogen's a feedstock for steel. Instead of hydrocarbons, you can decarbonize. Steel production and cement production are huge contributors to CO2. And so you look at like the effort to the reward, and there's actual paths to economics at work as well. And so, that's more the take that I would have, is that there's probably lower hanging fruit that can be addressed first.
Now let's get rid of the straws.
Well, it all comes back, at least in direct air capture and CO2. It comes back to Chuck's question: what is the optimal level of CO2?
No, we don't even know that.
No, that's something I talk about all the time. Is like people forget that we're still, coming out of an ice age, and there's a case that maybe there's
not enough CO2.
Yeah,
according to Mark.
and maybe
maybe there's a case that, hey, like maybe the world's a lot better place with no ice around the earth. Yeah, sure, your polar bears and shit die, but
we have a lot of great and damn food growing, and a lot more people probably. Because I think the hotter the climate, the more reproduction happens. Right?
This is fact. This is fact that humans by far have an easier time living in warmer climates than cold climates. You go look at, I remember last winter up in Wyoming, my friend, they had that huge blizzard come through, and it's like negative 50, 60 degrees Fahrenheit, whatever the temperature is. And they could not keep their gensets running on their drilling rig. The diesel kept gelling up. You don't have that problem, when it's warm. So humans are very good at living in warm climates, and we really struggle, and productivity decreases substantially in cold weather climates. So, I think that.
So you're advocating for a little bit of global warming.
No, I think that we could use some more global warming and CO2 in the atmosphere. I don't think that we're at like peak optimal level yet. Which that's like a very that'd be a hot take.
A lot more lithium ion batteries are going to blow up as it gets hotter.
This is also true. Yeah. So, I think it's funny because depending on, you have people in Boston like, oh, we couldn't even keep ice at our ice rink this winter. People like, there's no snow up in the mountains. Like, people associate that with something that they have the right to have. You don't have the right to have snow or ice. There's been plenty of times through history where there's been no ice on, the material amount of ice on the planet.
Dude, I need ice, bro. I need ice.
Go back to the time of the dinosaurs. This entire fucking planet was tropical and on fire, and that's
the peak, Mount Everest, up at the top, the rocks you're dealing with are limestone that were sub-sea floor. We have changed climates without man being around.
We have 5 ice ages that are documented, right? That's what I always laugh. Is people are like, oh, climate denier. I'm like, how can you deny that there's a climate? It doesn't make sense. There is.
By the way, I want to circle back to change something for the record. We talked about the tech companies driving when they put up a data center, they go to the local utility and say that, hey, it needs to be 100%. Well, I don't know the actual percentage, but many of those are offsets. They actually do not generate local renewable energy next to the data center.
That's a great
point.
That's
a huge issue.
It's financial engineering.
It's totally financial engineering and fraud.
There's so much fraud and grift in carbon credit marketplaces right now.
For all of us in Texas that are on a retailer and that we're buying 100% clean energy,
Yeah.
That's fake too.
Someone
you're buying offset.
Someone sent me a startup deal that they were looking at investing that was like a carbon credits marketplace, like rewards for shopping. And I was like, I looked at it, I just like skim through it, and I was like, tell you one thing, I was like, there's so much fucking grift and fraud in carbon marketplaces that I wouldn't touch any single company over there. I don't care what they're doing. But yeah, so that's a very important point. This is all financial engineering. It's not actually physical. You're getting it straight from the wind turbine.
We had some big news over the weekend, non-energy related. Maybe it's very energy related. We had two big events. One is the Aggies. What happened over there, man?
Ooh. The Jimbo Fisher era is over with a nice
dude. How much money was that? Speaking of money, dude, how much money?
The buyout was.
How much did you give to the buyout?
The buyout was the rest of the contract, which was about $77 million and change.
And what percentage was Mark's donation?
About the concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere. Yeah, that was a little surprising that they waited a week and they trounced Mississippi State at home, but I guess that was part of the process over the ensuing week after the loss at Ole Miss on the preceding Saturday.
You want to go early enough so you can get your choice of coach. I mean that right? Because I mean they're going to go to a bowl game, aren't they? Chuck?
Yeah, and what this allows is, I understand there's a special transfer portal window that opens up,
right?
And there was one 4-star that has announced that he's transferring, but this was a decision that was made prior to Fisher's announcement, and then he actually went in his social media post and lauded Coach Fisher. So it's going to, you want to get a jump. Somebody is not going to be taking their team to a bowl this bowl season because they'll be the new hire. We don't know who that is, unless it's Dan Campbell from the Lions. But he gets paid 60 days after the termination date. He gets paid a 25% of the remaining, and then 120 days after it starts kind of the 7 or 8 years of installments in equal amounts. So,
and there's no offset. He goes and signs a new contract tomorrow. There's no offset.
So before we end this, I got to bring up one more story because I'm always down for some good Greta Thunberg bashing. Did y'all see this video of the guy taking her mic away?
No.
So they're at this climate protest, and they're finally starting to eat their own. This guy walks up and takes the mic away from her, and he's like, I came here for a climate activist, not a political activist. And anyways, they start fighting over the microphone, and Greta finally gets the microphone back, and then they start chanting, which I still can't figure out what this chant means. No climate justice on occupied land. I don't know what that actually means.
Well, she was invoking what's going on in Palestine.
Yeah, this is Gaza stuff.
Yeah.
She's been promoting
She
Gaza.
was taking that.
She was pro-Palestinian in her remarks.
She was apparently making pro-Palestinian or pro-Hamas comments, and then that's what triggered the
guy to come up there.
The intervention.
But what is no climate justice on occupied land?
There's no link. There's no real link of climate justice and the Palestinians, but she's connected those dots because it's very similar overlaps of thinking and same people behind both sort of movements, if you will.
Got you. Yeah. So anyway, seeing this dude.
There we go.
Microphone away.
Dude, keep your politics pure, man.
So what we didn't get to was volcanoes and earthquakes. Maybe that's next week.
Next week. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, we got to wrap.
That's right.
We already had the earthquake. So
yeah, there
might be more.
All right. If y'all enjoyed this episode, appreciate you listening in. Make sure to tune in next week and share this one with a friend. Always appreciate when you guys share it. It seems like we've been getting a lot of people that are starting to listen to it now, so maybe we're fine.
And thank you, Chili's, for the sponsorship, by the way.
So the single greatest moment, we were walking around Exxon, and I took a bunch of steroids, a bunch of allergies medicines. So I told the youngsters walking us around, I said, I'm going to need to go to the bathroom a lot. I please don't want to hear any old guy prostate jokes. And someone turned and said, I thought it was Colin that had the prostate problem.
And Chuck's grin on his face is the happiest I've ever seen Chuck in his life. So,
Absolutely.
all right, we will catch y'all next week.
Cheers.
Later.